So it's one thing to come up with the thing and identify who it's for, but how do you communicate it? In the same way, if you were to go into a job interview, you're sitting across from the job interview, the hiring manager, they've got your resume in front of them. But how do you communicate your experiences on that resume to them in a way that makes them want to offer you the job?
This is Creative Operations, a podcast for B2B marketers who want to redesign how their own teams get creative work done. In each episode, Jacob Brain discusses the strategies, processes, and tools required to create amazing work that also has a business impact. Using a blend of personal stories and interviews with guests, Jacob uncovers how you can get the most out of your creative operations. Let's get started.
Hey there, my name is Jacob Brain, Agency Director and host of Creative Operations. Today I'm joined by Richmond Wong. He's an advisor to early stage B2B SaaS companies. He has this no fluff, outcome-driven approach that's so critical to this market. And it's really one of the things I really appreciate about him and one of the reasons I'm excited to have him on today. We actually met through Growth Mentor, which is a startup mentorship program that we're both a part of. We connected, and I love the way he approached things like product market fit, positioning, pricing, and really go-to-market strategies generally as he kind of engaged the mentees in this program. And I'm really excited to have him join us today. So without further ado, Richmond, welcome to Creative Operations.
Thanks for having me, Jacob. As you mentioned, I am a B2B early stage startup mentor and consultant and coach for these first-time founders, generally speaking. And the way I started was I actually started as a journalist and lawyer. But I think what I felt was a frustration with not being able to affect more agency and to create products and to work with companies that proactively went to the market, asked what they need, and created products and services for them. So that's how I ended up where I am right now, advising, coaching, and mentoring early stage startups.
That's good. That's good. And if you have this really diverse background, maybe actually we'll start there. Tell us a little bit about, you started as a journalist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Walk us through how you ended up, becoming a journalist. I think there was a brief tenure as a lawyer, and then you ended up where you are today doing this coaching. What did that path look like?
When I was a kid, what I wanted to be first was an archaeologist, but then I quickly pivoted to wanting to become a novelist. And so throughout high school, I wrote sort of short stories and that kind of thing. But in college, I think where I found the intersection between being able to write, but also being able to be paid for it in a commercial sense was in journalism. So I did that during college. I worked for local newspapers. I was never on the school newspaper. I was always doing journalism for commercial entities, local commercial entities. I also reached out to some national publications, book reviews, that kind of thing in Canada. And when I graduated from the University of Toronto, I found a job with the local, not quite local, based locally, but distributed nationally, the national magazine publisher here in Canada. But as I mentioned earlier, I think the frustration with that was being just a reporter of events rather than affecting events. And at that point, I was pretty young. I was 22, I think, at that time. And I couldn't quite see what the next step for me would be. And so, like many people at that age, I ended up in graduate school and law school. And that's how I became a corporate lawyer. And I don't regret the time I spent in the law firm. I spent 2 years with a top law firm. The equivalent of that would be not quite a McKinsey or a Bain or a Boston, but maybe an Accenture. So I ended up at the Accenture of law firms. And I learned a lot in terms of definitely professionalism, but also accountability and getting things done under time pressure, but with accuracy and precision and always with integrity and accountability.
Nice. That's good. Now, as you got into this startup world and a lot of things you were just talking about, you're an entrepreneur at heart, you like the fast pace of the startup world. Why take the advisory route instead of, joining the next unicorn startup sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So after I left the law firm, I joined a large company. I joined actually two large multinationals. And what I got through those experiences was, first of all, I had the tattoo on my head, of those two well-known multinationals. But the way it was structured was these teams were based in Asia. So at that time I was working in Hong Kong, was based in Hong Kong. And the teams in Asia are much leaner than the teams in North America or in Europe. And so what I got was big name branding, but startup experience. So the team, when I worked at Thomson Reuters, so that's the parent company of the news agency Reuters. There's Reuters, the news agency. And then at the time, there were a couple other divisions. There was the direct competitor to Bloomberg, which we call Icon, which has now been sold to, I think, Blackstone and London Stock Exchange. But I was in the most largest and most profitable division of Thomson Reuters, which was the legal tech division. That in Asia was structured like a startup. And what I got through that was being able to work sort of at an operational level across many different markets. So Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, and a few others. And being able to do that all hands on. So the reason why I didn't move straight, like after I left the multinationals into a startup, was I kind of had that experience. I had both was able to get that brand name on my resume, but more importantly, was able to get that sort of high growth startup experience from those multinationals where I launched several products.
That's cool. That's cool. So there's a bunch of directions we could go here. There's a lot of things I really want to talk to you about, and we'll see how many we can get through today. But let's start with maybe some of like the struggles that these B2B SaaS companies are running into, and then we can go from there. So when you're working with these companies or starting to work with them, they're coming to you for a reason, right? They're hitting walls, these scaling challenges that are really familiar with you. What are some of the biggest common challenges that these companies are running into that they come to you for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the biggest ones is not knowing who their audience is. And I think that's understandable. It's tough. I think a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, they start out as, and this is very common, as technical people. And what I mean by technical people is maybe there's engineers, so they're really good at coding. Or I've worked with somebody who was a lawyer, so they're really good at legal work. But what they're not good at is when you take your technical skill and SaaSify it, put it into a SaaS platform, you're offering,
that word.
Yeah, exactly. SaaSify it. Your offering is no longer like what it was before. So it's still in the legal realm, for example, but your offering is slightly different. And so who you're selling to and how you communicate that message has changed. And that is one of the biggest challenges.
That's good. Yeah. So in that, like where you're going at is just having a great product isn't enough. And this is a really common thing I've seen as well, is you build a better widget and then you go into the market and you talk about all the technical, reasons why this widget is better. But the newer piece that these individuals, these really smart people have to jump into is understanding like who they're selling to, how to talk about it. And so, niching is a super hot topic and it's been for a while now, but it's often like misunderstood. I'd say it's misunderstood, especially in relation to positioning. And so these like two words I find get kind of confused a lot. How do you typically describe to clients the difference between niching and positioning, how they're related as you navigate this really common problem you're just talking about?
Yeah, that's a good point. So niching and positioning do indeed get confused, and they are intertwined. So it's understandably, a lot of people get confused with it. The way I coach clients through it is niching is it is a specific group of people who you are targeting with a specific problem or opportunity that they want to create, that they have, that you have a solution for. So it's three pieces: the who, basically the either the pain point or the opportunity that you want to create, and then the third point is what you're offering or what your solution is. And so that's the niche. So you, generally speaking, the more narrow the niche that you can target, the more sort of pricing power you have, like the more you can charge, right? Because there are less, you're basically boxing out competitors. Positioning is intertwined with the concept of niching, but what it is, more of a communication issue. And what I mean by that is you've identified the who, you've identified either the pain point or the opportunity that they want created for themselves, and then your product. But the next step is, how do you actually communicate that in a way that resonates with your niche? So it's one thing to come up with the thing and identify who it's for, but how do you communicate it? In the same way, if you were to go into a job interview, you're sitting across from the job interview, the hiring manager, they've got your resume in front of them, but how do you communicate your experiences on that resume to them in a way that makes them want to offer you the job. So that's position.
When these companies are coming to you and we're having these niching conversations and they're trying to determine like, I know I'm too broad, you know, you bought me in, I'm with you on this niching thing. They'll often take these like really obvious, but like there's just simple approach to niching, like just picking an industry. But how do you go ahead and like, how do you coach these individuals to find the right niche? What things are you thinking about? What like frameworks are you thinking about when you're helping them navigate this?
So there's the who, and then there's the what. So that's the problem that they want solved or the opportunity that they want created. The third piece is you can actually niche by several different ways. So for example, there's by geography, there's by age, psychographics, revenue size, industry. But what you can actually do in that third piece is you can actually tack on multiple pieces. So what I mean by that is you have your who. So maybe it's operations managers. And then the problem is maybe they with certain sort of hard product-based supply chain management. So that's the what. So they need help with that, managing the supply chain process. The third piece there you can actually break it down into several components. So for example, operations managers who have supply chain, who need help managing supply chain issues for computer hardware, who work at companies with revenues between 500 million and 750 million in Southern Europe. And then you can tack on additional pieces as well. But in this example, we niched by revenue size, which was 500 million to 750 million, and by geography in Southern Europe. And you can tack on as many as you want to get a specific targeted niche. And you can do that regardless of the size of the company. So I used an enterprise level company, but as an example, but you can do it for, early stage startups as well.
Yeah, that's good. And so as you start adding these layers of niche, of approaches, of pain points, of the who we were talking about, of the company size, employee count, things like that, as you're adding these layers, your market is, it's going from too big where you can't differentiate yourself to smaller and smaller and smaller. What are like your indicators, or how do you know that you've gotten like niche enough? How niche is niche enough?
Well, in my experience, you can never really be too niched. And the way I think about it is I would rather you be more niched than not niched enough. If you start up very niche, you will find somebody who needs your help and is willing to pay you for it. Now, maybe that market is too small, so then you can expand your niche. But you're better off being very niche, finding somebody who's willing to pay you, and you find that indeed that the market is too small, then you can expand your niche. But the opposite problem may not be true. If you're too general, you may not actually be able to differentiate yourself from competitors to the extent that you are able to find your first customers, because there probably already are other established or more entrenched competitors, reputation, with a bigger network, with more connections, with a bigger marketing budget than you, who can box you out. So you're better off starting out more niche, getting those first paying customers, and then iterating on your offering and who you offer it to down the line, getting those first paying customers first.
Yeah, that's really good. There's often this like huge fear in niching that you over tighten things up, which is a legitimate thing to pay attention to, but it's often not balanced with what you're talking about, with the fear of what happens when you're too broad, right? And so you need to, I guess, always navigate that like blurry line between your market is so small you have no one you're talking to, and your market is so big that you actually can't, which is the next thing I want to talk about, really position yourself in a way that's unique, because you're naturally going to be competing against like a scale that you can't fight, at least in the startup world.
Exactly.
This is all great kind of advice here. So I love this. Once the startup has identified their niche, they found a good kind of spot in that, they're comfortable with that kind of balance between too niche and not niche enough. Next layer is positioning. And right, the combination of the right niche and right positioning, getting that right will resolve what you were talking about earlier. It's like knowing who you're talking to, what to say. It solves a ton of marketing problems. The list goes on of the benefits there. But how do you then start approaching the positioning side of things? What do you do to enter that conversation?
Yeah. So it's being clear about what you're going to say and where you're going to say it. So I think the easier part is finding out where you're going to say it. So if you've identified the who, you have a pretty good idea in terms of where they are, either offline or online. So offline could be, so in the legal tech world, a lot of relationships with prospects are built, and also relationships maintained with existing customers at, face-to-face high-end events. And big legal tech companies will actually go and sponsor these events and rub shoulders with clients and potential clients. So that's an offline example. Online would be, maybe your prospect is spending time on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever. So the identifying where they are in terms of the positioning component, that's the easier part. What you're going to say, that is a little bit more difficult. And I think what that would entail is actually going out and talking to your users and your buyers or your potential buyers and seeing what it is that their pain points are, how they are currently servicing their current pain points or opportunities that they want created, how they're currently doing that, and taking your product and its capabilities and crafting a message that is able to speak to a way that efficiently, for example, or conveniently, or lowers the cost of the way that they're compared to the current way that they're doing.
Oftentimes when you have a startup, you're talking product market fit now, right? When you're having these conversations with your ideal audience, now that you've talked about kind of nailing down that niche, oftentimes before a company's really even started, or at least like the first step is to do some exercise in product market fit. Sometimes it's a formal process. Sometimes it's I know enough people in the market. I'm confident enough that I can sell this thing. Is this something that you recommend, or you work with clients to often like continue to revisit at that startup stage as you continue to narrow down that audience and understand them better? Is it more of a one-time sort of thing and maybe way down the road? Is it an ongoing thing? How do you typically approach this with your clients?
Yeah, it's definitely an ongoing thing. Positioning, communication, product market fit, it is not a one-time thing where, it's not like a Lego block, the Lego blocks snap together and then they stay together. It's not, it doesn't work like that. The market is continually evolving as a result of, for example, technological change or societal change, economic change. And I think we're seeing that right now in different parts of the world, where economics in certain countries right now is changing the way consumers are spending their money. Or, for example, technological. So I read an article or several articles that Stack Overflow has lost something like 30%, if not more, of the traffic in the last few months because of ChatGPT. So software engineers are not going to Stack Overflow anymore, right? They can get the answers instantaneously from ChatGPT, and they can ask follow-up questions and get instantaneous answers in a way that they can't really do on Stack Overflow. So, positioning a product market fit is not guaranteed. So you can get it, but it's not guaranteed that you hold on to it. And so it is an ongoing thing. And the smart companies know it's an ongoing thing, and they act accordingly with the realization that it is a changing thing on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, that's good. When you mentioned this a little bit earlier, when we're working with tech companies, and a lot of the people who listen to the podcast are really small marketing teams. And so they work with these founders who are highly technical, super intelligent people that really know their stuff, but they get stuck in this, like, just talking about their product from a technical term standpoint. And oftentimes the customer is not as technical, right? Otherwise they'd build the software themselves or whatever. So they're talking like this different language in their prospects, but they think that because this is how I think, this is how the prospect thinks. So there's this trap that you can get in. I assume you run into this pretty frequently as well, based on what you said earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what do you typically do to help them balance like the logic behind technical discussions and the value in that with like the emotional human side of sales and marketing?
Mm-hmm. So this is the way I put it, is your customers are not paying you for the brilliance of your technical implementation. They're paying for features and capabilities that either solve their problems, that current problems that they have, or anticipated problems that they have, or that create desired benefits that they want. They're not, the technology is important, very important in some cases, like ChatGPT, for example. But at the end of the day, I pay for ChatGPT, And it's the best $20 I spend every month, but I'm not paying for the technical brilliance of it. I'm paying for a service that is able to comprehensively answer pretty much any question that I have instantaneously with the ability to answer follow-up questions should I have it. And not only any type of follow-up question, but specific follow-up questions that are specifically tailored to any sort of previous responses that it gave me. And that's what I'm paying for. And that's something that is the type of example I use to remind very technical founders that while the technology is important and the implementation is important, at the end of the day, their customer is paying for an outcome, not the implementation of the technology.
Yeah. They're the client is paying for that result, that outcome. And so actually I was talking to my wife recently and like the example of like a restaurant came to mind. Like I don't go to a restaurant necessarily to get a better steak. I go because number one, I hate cooking.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, I like the experience of being like waited on. Number three, like the music, the atmosphere is something I can't replicate. And so yes, chef, the food is critical, but at the same time, what's also critical is making sure that you're speaking to the result that people are trying to get, not just the things that you're providing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's really, I think, one of the biggest things for any founder or any business owner, whether it's a small startup or a big multinational, is who's paying your bills and what do they want? Like, what are they looking for? That's I think the biggest question, no matter what scale of company it is.
There's this other element of positioning that we haven't really touched on yet, and it's like pricing, because pricing is in many cases a way to position yourself in the market, and it's not often seen as that, but I think it certainly is. In the SaaS world, there are a lot of things to consider in pricing. I was probably actually more complicated than the average business due to the nature of like the online piece of it. Billing cycles can be different, price points can change, plans can be gated, freemium models. There's a million different things to talk about in this. So for our listeners out there, a lot of these small marketing teams who might be struggling to get the traction they need, I'll start here. Like, how can you determine if pricing might be an issue, right? I've talked to a lot of people that maybe they're in the startup, their prices might be too high, their model is kind of a weird model that doesn't fit the market. What would you like encourage someone to look into? What process would you follow to see like, is this pricing an issue? And then we'll get to maybe how you'd rework that or things to think about when making decisions like that.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say to any founder is don't feel bad. Pricing is difficult. There's actually a book out there called Confessions of a Pricing Man. I think that was the title by, he's considered the preeminent pricing strategist in the world. And he's not really able to give a definitive answer. So before I go into my answers, just to any founders or any listeners, don't feel bad. Pricing is very difficult. And the problem is it's a very squishy thing in that a lot of it's psychological. It's not like 1 + 1 = 2. Like, it's not like math. A lot of it is actually human psychology. And in terms of the question you asked of how do we determine whether it's working or not are people paying? I think that's really the final litmus test is the different prices that you set, the different price points that you set in relation to the offerings that you have. Are people paying? So do you have revenue flowing in? Doesn't have to be a lot, but if you can at least get some, then you know that the price point that you have put out onto the market matches the ability and willingness, so basically the price sensitivity of certain people on the market who are looking for your solution.
That's good. Now, would you say that so price point is one of them, but there are also so many other layers to pricing that you can add, right? Like, is it all up front? Do you pay quarterly, monthly? Do you start with some sort of free version? There's a whole creative layer you can add on to this instead of like the more, if you're buying like a thing, it's, well, is this thing cheaper than the thing I'm comparing it to? What are some of those other things to think about, or maybe more creative approaches to pricing that can help people differentiate themselves as they think about maybe adjusting that if that might be their issue?
Yeah. So the framework I use with my clients is a 3-step process in terms of coming up with a price that they can offer to the market. And the three pieces are, number one, there is the price point. The second part is the billing frequency. So how often you're charging, right? It can be a one-time purchase, like a pair of shoes. It can be billed monthly, like let's say your Spotify or YouTube subscription. The third piece is in my blogs, I call it gating frequency or gating model. I've now changed that to something that's been more understandable. It's called the feature set, basically. I think that it's a lot easier to remember. So the three components are, number one, price point. So the price point is what most people think is their pricing, but that's just the beginning parts. The price point is actually like, what is the amount in whatever currency you're using, like US dollars, pesos, yuan, whatever
Euros,
it is, right?
Yeah.
But right, $45 or whatever it is. That's the price point. Second piece is your billing frequency. So how often you charge them, monthly, annually, semi-annually, whatever it is. And then the feature set is basically what are they going to get for that price point, $25 a month. What are they going to get? So there is sort of different pieces you can put in, layer into it. You can have just the core product, which is your SaaS platform, but you can offer alongside what I call bonuses. And bonuses might be, for example, extended support. It might be webinars. It might be training courses, whatever it is. But the pricing framework that I use with clients is that 3-step process of price point, billing frequency, and feature set.
That's good. That's good. Taking a little bit of a turn here. So we've talked about a lot of things I mentioned. I have a whole list of things I wanted to connect with you on. One of the ones we hadn't really talked on yet is something that I think you speak to in depth in a way that I think a lot of people haven't, based on your career trajectory and kind of the experiences you've had, is around like selling globally. And this is not a new thing, right? People have been selling globally for a while now, but over the last years, I've seen more conversations about it, having those conversations earlier on in like a startup's journey. Like it's really from day one, they're doing this. And so if companies are doing it earlier in their growth, kind of faster than ever, this is something you have a lot of experience in. What are some of the things to keep in mind when taking the leap across geographies? Like it's not as easy as like expanding your Google Ads campaign to, a new country. It's deeper than that. Walk through some of those things to consider, some things to keep in mind, what that looks like.
Yeah. I think for many companies, they can actually do that. They can actually expand where they are advertising in terms of the online platforms. I think in terms of selling globally, where the sort of more considered, measured response comes into play is if you are selling mission critical or enterprise level solutions, and that it requires much more than just expanding your advertising budget online, for example. So I'll give you an example. But at a couple of the companies I worked at that sold enterprise level software, those components touched on several sort of mission critical functions of the clients, and that required a several months long process of actually flying to their countries, educating them on what and how the new product would solve in terms of their needs and how to transition off their existing solutions. It also required cultural nuance. So if you are trying to sell basically a high ticket offering in terms of software, it's not as simple as sort of self-service where they click a button on your website and they buy the software. You do need people who can speak to them with the cultural nuance, preferably in their local language, and who are able, and your company is able to offer assurances and the capability to offer them the support that they need down the line. So it's a little trickier in terms of, it doesn't necessarily have to be enterprise pricing, but if you are the type of B2B SaaS that, even if you're a startup that touches upon mission critical components and you're selling internationally, a lot of times it requires that extra touch beyond just expanding your advertising footprint.
So for these organizations that are looking to kind of expand a geography maybe, or just get into that like bigger market, whether it be geography or something else, there's a lot of options in front of them. How do you guide them in deciding what approach to take to expand maybe that niche we were talking about earlier, to have a bigger market to go after?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you can either go wide and or go deep. You can do both at the same time. So going deep is basically in your whole market, you have an ICP, an ideal customer profile. So for example, maybe it's medium-sized medical clinic medium-sized private medical clinics. And so when you go abroad, you can find more of those in the foreign market. So let's say you are a company based in the US and you want to expand into, let's say, Sweden or England or Japan. You can find more of those same ideal customer profiles. So medium-sized private medical clinics in those countries. Now, of course, what you would probably need to do is localize it for regulations. If you are in a regulated industry, so if you're in medical, absolutely. Localize it for culture, localize it also for localized business use cases. So in terms of business, they might actually be using or finding uses for your product that are perhaps slightly different from the way your local customers are using it. Going wide is, and you can go wide in your home market as well, is looking for new customer segments that you're not already serving. So maybe, let's say you have a client in Hong Kong, for example. And so going deep would be medium-sized private medical clinics. But maybe when you also go after the government-funded hospital groups there. That would be an example of going wide, because you're going outside of your core ICP into usually it's an adjacent customer profile that would have the same or similar needs or desire or benefits to be created that your product, without significant modification, can help serve.
That's good. That's great advice there.
Okay.
So we've talked about a lot of these different, really, they're big decisions to make around pricing and niching and positioning and things like that. And these are all things to nail, but there's this theme that I really love that happens with these smaller teams that we work with around this like David and Goliath story, where you have this smaller team, small marketing team even, taking market share from the likes of Oracle. What are some of those like things that those teams do right that you work with that really set them apart and allow them to hit those heights of growth and scale that maybe some other startups haven't been able to hit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are several pieces to this. The first piece is, of course, properly identifying who you're going to serve and identifying the pain points and or opportunities that they want created, and then creating a solution. So whether it's a product or a service to resolve or meet those pain points or desired benefits. So that's the first piece. But a piece I think that doesn't get talked as much about is the mindset and the action taking part of building a business as a startup when you're competing, particularly when you're competing against larger, perhaps better resourced, more entrenched competitors. And that is several components. It is the mindset of having the stamina to come in and day out and do the work. So do the work that's required, even if it's painful, even if there is a temptation to take it easy or to give up. You have to push through the pain. And that is just reality when you're building a startup and you're, building awareness of your product and you're building relationships with prospects and clients. So that is just a reality. So there's that piece, but also and I've seen this in different companies I've worked with and worked in as well, is the accountability piece. So it's easy to sort of deliver on a success, to have a one-time success or discrete points of success along your journey. But what's more important is having the accountability in your team to be able to surface any sort of hiccups. And when there is a hiccup, come up with a solution, implement the solution, and make sure that doesn't happen again. And to make sure that everybody knows that they are all responsible for coming up with solutions to any sort of problems that come up, implementing that solution. And that is done on an ongoing basis, and it never stops as long as you want to stay in business. And so it is a combination of mindset, so the stamina and the accountability, but the mindset isn't enough. You actually need the action taking. So the ING, action taking. So action taking on a consistent basis as you compete on the marketplace with your direct competitors, but also alternatives that could take your place. So alternatives are products that are not specifically targeted at your ICP, but which your ICP could use as a solution. So for example, an example would be Arm & Hammer baking soda, right? Some people use it for baking. A lot of people don't even buy sort of commercialized deodorizer. They just buy Arm & Hammer as an alternative to more commercialized deodorizers.
I use that stuff for my cat litter. That is not advertised on the box.
Exactly.
That's good. I could honestly probably talk to you all day about this stuff, but I think this is probably a good spot to wrap up as we're hitting our time here. But before I do, where should people go to learn more about what you're doing? Maybe they're looking for help. Where would you have those people go?
Yeah. So the easiest way to find me is through my website, which is www.richmondwong.com. So that's my name, Richmond, RICHMONDWONG.com.
Good. Well, Richmond, thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time, spending it with me today. It was great having you on Creative Operations.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Jacob.
Of course. Talk soon, man.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creative Operations, the podcast for B2B marketers who want to create amazing work that also has a business impact. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow Creative Operations wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or access all episodes at marketersindemand.com/creative operations. See you next time.